The meeting to order. Thank you, everyone who came out on this weird time for this meeting, but I'm sure it's going to be robust and engaging, and we're looking forward to it. So, without further ado, Mr. James Hurt, you have a presentation for us on the wildlife management.
All right. Well, good evening. Good morning. Good evening.
Yes.
So I'd like to just start reminding about the deer management philosophy that we have in the city. How do we live with wildlife and coexist together? It's kind of how we balance things in our city, a sustainable city, and I just like to make sure, just remind the Public Safety Committee of that. I'm going to start first a little bit with the regional discussions that have been going on. I know we've had this conversation a couple of times. I've been trying to keep you updated. The work is progressing. I think I mentioned last time that the Grand Valley is under contract now and is starting to collect data throughout the county. You may or may not be aware that a survey went out last week to 93,000 email addresses in the county. And as of November 18th, they've had, 5,464 respondents already. And of that, 1,700 were from the city of Grand Rapids. 30 different jurisdictions are getting responses. So if you know anyone who received it, I would love to get their feedback on it in terms of how they view deer population in our city and in our county. And then once that information is tallied, we'll be looking at probably early 25 to look at the community survey, to look at the the surveying that Grand Valley's doing, kind of pull all that together, and then there's going to be some policy discussions with the stakeholders that are part of this process. This I find interesting. I wanted to share with you. It's what they call a heat map. So the map on the left side is the entire county. And what this is I think I shared with you before that we started earlier in the year collecting data on deer carcasses that are collected. It's been interesting to find the data. In terms of, you can see our city on the right-hand side. Most of us have, anecdotal ideas on where they think the deer population is concentrated, but this is real good statistical information for us to point towards. So I wanted to share that with you. And we do have it for every jurisdiction that's within the county. I shared with you some of the hunting programs that are going on in different communities in the state. Here's two examples I just wanted to highlight, which I think I might have shared a little bit about the Kent County one when I was here last. This is one they've had for a couple of decades, where they do permits for deer hunting on their parks. Most of the actually all the three parks that they're using this are predominantly a rural forest land. They're not actively being programmed for recreation activities. They're adjacent to farm fields as well. And they've been giving out permits to these locations, 15 in each location. So they've been running 3. It's been pretty successful, but it's actually a deer and a turkey program. But they are using it on private property, strictly on public land. The other one I know I mentioned before was this Meridian Township, which is just north of Lansing, over by Lansing. They've been doing this for about 24 years, and it's been pretty successful. They recognized they had an overpopulation of deer in different parts of their township, so they instituted this program, and it's really on public and private property. A lot of it's parkland, some of it's preserve land, and some of it's private. And you can see, if I look at some of the stats in here, they had 6,700 hunters that participated in 2023. They removed 141 deer. They require background checks. They do a whole bunch of testing. I'm not sure how they do proficiency testing, but that would be interesting to watch. But that's how you participate. So in 2020, they actually stepped up their program and they brought in law enforcement. So they have a period of the time, it was about 10 days last year in early 24, where they took out 159 deer over that 10-day period with the law enforcement. And it's managed by their parks and public works departments. So if you can add the numbers up, they're removing about 300 deer per year. And I have a report that shows over that time period, the car deer accidents declining within their township. So it appears to be working. This is a program that's offered through the DNR. It's called the Deer Management Assistance Permits Program. I think I might have touched on this last time I was here. This would be permits that we would be able to obtain as a municipality that we could distribute to hunters, not only on public land, but on private land as well. So they wouldn't necessarily have to use their personal deer hunting license. They could use these licenses and we would be able to obtain those. It's restricted to antlerless deer only. I've had several conversations with the DNR. They're telling me they believe we would qualify. And they sent me the application and we can fill it out and send it in. They said it would pretty short turnaround. So if we were to try to do something in January, like I talked at the last time I was here, we would be able to use this program. And I think it would be really beneficial. Just to remind the Public Safety Committee, the request you made was for us to explore having a deer hunting pilot this season, fall, winter, as well as looking at it in a city park, or Blandford Nature Center has come up a couple of different times. So I just want to kind of walk through some of the work that we've done to accommodate that request. What I find in most deer management plans, it's a combination of public land and private land. If you think about all the land in the city, and I know Mr. Brown asked last time when he was here, could he hunt on his property? And the answer is yes, you can do that. But it has to be archery only. It has to have a sufficient amount of acreage for you able to do that. Your projectile can't leave your property line, and you really should be a safe distance from any kind of structure. So if you have 3 acres, 5 acres, or more, and it's fairly wooded, you would have a good opportunity to remove some of those deer. I have been approached by a number of different residents who have offered their property if we wanted to include that in some sort of a hunt. So I do think if we're going to start building this deer management plan, private property needs to be part of the component, at least from my research so far. And I don't know if you are familiar with the Michigan National Deer Association. They reached out to us, very interested. The president of this association is here in the Grand Rapids area. They have members. They are insured. They're very interested in participating with whatever kind of program we may be able to put together. So I find it really comforting to know that they would be able to help us, as opposed to us taking applications and trying to sort through hunters that if we are going to do something down that road. The public property. So Blandford Nature Center has come up a number of times, and they do have a fair amount of property. I've talked to them, and as my notes indicate here, they don't believe the hunting activity on a nature center really meets their organization's philosophy. And I can understand that. They were going to go back and talk about it, but I suspect that that's not going to be a viable option for us. In terms of, there was some hesitancy from their leadership about participating in like a pilot hunt on their property. So we turned our request to what you asked in terms of a parkland. I think Commissioner Robbins brought that up, parkland. So we looked at a number of different parks. We've met with the Parks Director who's here to answer any questions you may have in terms of parks. And what we found, and I mentioned the Kent County one just to give you some context, all the parks that the county is using are not programmed for recreational activity. There's no trails, there's no soccer games going on. So we started looking at parks that we have, parkland, that's not really programmed. And we found a couple. One that is listed here is 960 Bristol. What we found in talking with others, you have conflicts if you are going to have hunters in with people recreating. And it's not uncommon, at least from what I've gathered, if you're going to have hunting in a park, they will shut the parks down that I'm finding in other jurisdictions for like a weekend or a week long, and then they'll exercise deer management. So this one, 960 Bristol, we own. It's 12 acres. Those of you on the west side probably can picture where it's at. It's a steep, graded, wooded lot. that's been difficult to develop in the past. So that could be an option in terms of moving forward with a pilot yet this season. This is actually a picture of it. Almost 12 acres. I put together some rules and regulations that if we are going to move forward with a pilot that would apply to hunters that are going to be on our public land. I mentioned this before, but no firearms. This would be an archery deer hunting permitted only, and it would be only deer, not any other game that's located on that property. No baiting, no putting screws or things in the trees, nails. This is pretty common regulations that I'm finding that are running this type of program. Ground blinds are permitted. Field dressing. It would be allowed, but they would have to discard it. So what we talked about is providing them some sort of a cleanup station with a cart or some sort of mechanism where we can dispose of the field dressing material that comes out of a deer. They have to all comply with DNR rules. Hunters must maintain 30-yard distance from any property line, 150 yards from any building. This is another one that I think we want to make sure if we're going to do community engagement, we make sure that residents know that it's likely that a deer could run off the property if it's wounded. And that hunter needs to secure permission to go on that other person's property. Each hunter would have to sign a waiver identifying the city, holding us harmless. They would be allowed to keep the harvested deer, or we would encourage them to donate it for distribution to a local food bank. And of course, the city would have the rights to revise these rules as deemed necessary. Some logistical considerations to bring to your attention. The process of selecting hunters, I mentioned the Michigan National Deer Association. They'd be a great partner. They already have hunters that are part of their organization. They've expressed interest in partnering with us. We have limited runway to try to implement something by January 1st. And then, of course, I mentioned community engagement. If we're going to do something on the Bristol property, we would need to start moving fairly quickly. And I know we talked about this, but the community benefit of being able to process and donate harvested deer to our community would be a very, very good benefit. We're still continuing to explore those options and how that would work. When I mentioned Meridian Township, they have a really good donated program there. The hunter also has the option to donate it or take it. And about 60% of the deer that they're taking in Meridian Township are donated back. And of course, I mentioned some of the local food banks. All right, here's the recommendations from the staff to the Public Safety Committee. Option 1, we could pause the deer hunting pilot this January to allow more development time to build a comprehensive plan that we could implement next fall. Option 2, inform and educate residents through community meetings in December on archery hunting on private property. I mentioned private property is a big component that I really think needs to be part of our plan. We could partner with the Michigan National Deer Association that can connect hunters to residents. They would be the ones making that match. Then option 3, if the Public Safety Committee desires to have a pilot hunt this season, staff would recommend an archery pilot for antlerless deer only during the period of January 1st to 31st, and it would be on the 960 Bristol Avenue property. I mentioned community engagement would need to occur. We'd have to start moving on that fairly soon. I mentioned this earlier. We'll be evaluating all this information that we're gathering, the surveys, what Grand Valley is doing in terms of the population, and we'll be looking at that in February with a larger group throughout the county. So the next step, if the direction by the Public Safety Committee is to move forward with option 3, we would bring this to the City Commission for discussion at their December 3rd, 2024 meeting. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions I can, or Mr. Marquardt from the Parks Department is here as well.
Thank you, Mr. Hurt. Colleagues, questions?
So, based on what was stated in the presentation, that property owners that have a minimum of 3 acres to allow archery hunting on their properties. Is there an answer to those who have contacted me and said, they're in my backyard, they're in my neighborhood?
When I spoke to the DNR, they would not recommend going below 3 acres.
So there's no answer for those folks.
If they have less than 3 acres, it would not comply with what is being proposed. You want to be able to do it safely. You want to make sure that the projectile is not going off your property. And when you shoot a bow and arrow, it can go 50, 60 yards if you miss.
Mm-hmm.
Or farther.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for this presentation. I appreciate it. I know your team's been really hard at work getting some information for us. I think Commissioner Goey makes a good point, but I think too, I mean, deer are very transient, and I think, if individuals who meet that property criteria are able to take part in that, I think it is going to benefit all residents too, not just people who are eligible to, because they'll by nature see less deer running around their neighborhoods. In terms of the options, though, I almost wonder if we couldn't do a version of options 2 and 3. I think there's definitely room for education for residents of what city ordinances do permit already, which isn't a cost to the city beyond just the outreach it would entail to kind of catch people up to speed on what they're able to do. Option 3, I think, from the feedback I've heard, I think there's certainly a lot of interest from people in something like this, even if it's small and it's not, the most robust thing possible, just given the tight turnaround time. I do think that there's value in still doing something of that regard. So that's just my thoughts, I think, based on the options presented.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
You can fight over who wants to go
One
first.
comment on that. Okay. I appreciate the work that you've already put into this, because there's no firearms, I think, is essential in the small geography. I mean, even if it's 12 acres, guns just are not appropriate. One of the things that we need to think through is a kill with bow and arrow. Is that effective? So I want to make sure that there'd be follow-up on those animals that are tractors. The rules that you set here, I would be in favor of a pilot program. However, there's also a certain amount of public relations information I think that should go out, because if it's just a program that leaks out there and people make their own conclusions, I think this is fairly well thought through. So I think it should be encouraged to move forward, and we'll see what the discussion is about January or December.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Well, I said this before, but if we can include in that publicity program to tell people to stop feeding the deer, because they really think they're cute and huggable, but they're not. So, and just, in our yard, they come up and eat right out of the bird feeders, for crying out loud. And they have conversations with me. They hang out. I offered them a cocktail the other day, but they're just so bold. They don't even care, So that's the big thing that I've heard from a lot of people, that if we can get that message out there, just,
I can add it to the rules that's there, but it's already a state law.
yeah, well, there you go. There you go.
Anyone else?
I was just curious to know, have you done any surveys with the hunters to find out their capacity?
Just the organization I talked to that is interested in participating with us. That's the extent that I've done that.
And some of their feedback pertaining to this antlerless capacity and the archery versus the guns.
The feedback I'm getting is that would be an appropriate method of how to reduce the herd in the city.
Okay. Thank you.
This does not include crossbows, is that correct?
It does.
It does.
Crossbows are considered part of the archery season.
City Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Hurd. A couple of things. The guidelines about, from DNR about 3 acres versus our own ordinance that specifies no shooting a bow or arrow within 450 feet. Is there, and maybe this is a question for the city attorney or our attorney who happens to hunt, that 3 acres, that's a guideline, but that's not the law, correct? That's MDR.
That's correct.
So, but our ordinance, our local law says you just can't be within 150 feet,
That's your
150 yards of a building.
That's actually part of the state law, the 450 feet.
Yep.
150 yards.
But is that restated in our weapons ordinance as well?
I think it is.
Yeah. Regardless, if that state, whether it's consistent with our local ordinance and state law being the same. So I just want to be clear. So that means that someone who may not have 3 acres can still shoot deer on their property as long as it's not within 150 yards from a building.
I would say yes. The 3 acres is just a number that the DNR and I talked about. It's not in the statute. It's really about doing it safely. That's what it comes down to.
Okay.
Anything else? Good. That's a good point that was brought up by City Manager. And I know a lot of times when things happen, the first thing that we talk about most times is community engagement and getting the word out and making sure that people understand. But when you start talking about all these different levels, it'd be interesting to know how many people actually know all of that. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so once you put this out, and I think option 3 is a great start, because it's just centrally located on one piece of property, as opposed to doing something else really quickly, trying to gear up for a time in January, and then we have all this confusion, and somebody comes and says, well, but if the state law says this,
Right.
and you're saying this, well, which one really is it? And we don't want people out there just being rogue and making their own personal interpretations of what the law actually says. So I think it would be good for us to really find out what that is and have that coincide with what we're trying to do. I do like, personally, option 3, because it keeps it to one property, where it could really kind of be a pilot to see how that's working.
Yes.
And then gives us time to ramp up and really get people the information that they need and understand and have all of those things in place for fall 2025, because they're not just going to disappear anyway between now and then. It's just not going to happen, right? And so winter's coming. They're going to be looking for food. They're going to be doing the things that they do. And then we have more little Bambis in the spring, right? So that's my thought. Anybody else?
Birth control pills for.
I'm not going to comment. If that's it, thank you, Mr.
Hold on, sir. I think would be good if we got a recommendation from the voting members of the Public Safety Committee on which options you would support going to City Commission, because I've heard 2, option 2 and 3, and option 3. So if there can be a motion and a second and a vote from our 3 elected officials on which options to recommend to City Commission, we would bring those forward in December.
I would make a motion to consider both options 2 and 3 to be presented to the full city commission for feedback.
I'll support that.
Because 2 is mainly communication
Information. Yep.
and
Education.
information. Yeah. All right. Support, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It carries. So we'll look forward to bringing option 2 mixed with 3 to the city commission in December for a vote.
Well, I think what we do, we would more likely, since the other commissioners have not been as involved, we would probably
Presentation.
have a discussion at the committee of the whole meeting on the 3rd, and if we get consensus on direction, I don't think there's any want to clarify, there's no other legislation that would need to be enacted because our Parks Director, as I understand it, within his own authority could permit that to happen. So it would be mainly a conversation and discussion, and then we would proceed forward with the staff work, if unless I'm misstating anything.
No, I think you're on it.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, I think the full briefing on like you gave us for them, but also including the language from the state as opposed to what we're talking about in our own ordinances here would be helpful.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you. City Manager, you took a breath.
No, that's okay.